Kira Johansson's backpack was found wedged between two granite rocks at 900 meters elevation in Torres del Paine National Park. Her hiking poles were still attached. Her water bottle was full. Her phone was inside, dead, sealed in a waterproof case. Her body was nowhere. She had been missing for 4 days. The Chilean search and rescue team that found the backpack noted something strange. The pack wasn't torn. It wasn't thrown. It was placed. Deliberately. Straps unbuckled. Lid open. As if Kira had taken it off, set it down, and walked away. Into what? A ridgeline with a 300-meter vertical drop on one side and a 120 km/h wind that had already ripped trees from the ground. That backpack is the last physical trace of Kira Johansson. She was 28 years old. She had 340,000 followers on Instagram. And 6 days before she vanished, she posted a video that was watched 11 million times. In that video, she screamed at a park ranger named Mateo Silva and called him, on camera in front of other hikers, a bureaucrat playing God with people's vacations. That video is the reason most people know her name, not her travel blog, not her photography, not the 43 solo treks she completed across 4 continents without a single incident. The video. The rant. The moment she became the internet's villain. But here's what the viral clips never showed you. What was cut from the original footage. What the internet didn't care about. Because outrage is more shareable than context. Kira asked Mateo a question before the rant. A specific, calm, reasonable question. She asked, "What time is the storm expected to arrive?" Mateo answered, "Tomorrow afternoon. Maybe evening." Kira then asked, "So the trail is safe today?" Mateo said, "Probably, but we close it 24 hours in advance as a precaution." That exchange, the calm one, the rational one, happened 90 seconds before the screaming started. Nobody posted that part. It didn't fit the narrative. Entitled Blogger versus Heroic Ranger. Simple story. Easy to share. Easy to judge. Easy to forget that Kira had a point. The trail was safe that day. The storm wasn't supposed to hit for another 18 hours. The closure was precautionary, not based on immediate danger. Kira was wrong to yell at him. She was wrong to humiliate him publicly. She was wrong to post it online. But she wasn't wrong about the weather. Not entirely. And that's what makes this story so much more disturbing than a simple "influencer ignored warning and died" headline. Because the storm didn't arrive when Mateo said it would. It arrived 18 hours early. A freak event. A gust front that meteorologists later called unprecedented for that time of year. The 120 km/h winds that likely killed Kira weren't supposed to happen when they happened. The forecast was wrong. Not Mateo's fault. Not the weather service's fault. Atmospheric conditions shifted in ways that models didn't predict. But the result was the same. Kira hiked into a trail that was closed based on a forecast that turned out to be wrong in every direction. The danger came early, and she was alone on an exposed ridge when it hit. Now, everyone who watched the viral video assumed Kira was an arrogant fool who ignored obvious danger. The internet decided she deserved what happened. Comment sections filled with variations of, "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." People who had never hiked a day in their lives felt qualified to declare that Kira's death was her own fault. And maybe it was. Partly. She chose to hike a closed trail. That decision was hers. Nobody made her do it. Nobody forced her past the closure barriers. She went alone, without telling the park office, without registering her route. Those were choices. Bad ones. But this story has more than one villain. And Kira's arrogance is only one chapter in a longer, darker sequence of failures that nobody talks about. If you want to understand what really happened to Kira Johansson, not the internet version, not the headline version, not the version that makes you feel morally superior, you need to know 3 things the viral video never told you. First, the hostel where Kira stayed the night before she disappeared knew she was planning to hike the closed trail. A staff member saw her packing her bag at 5 a.m. They said nothing. They didn't alert the park. They didn't try to stop her. When investigators asked why, the hostel owner said, "It's not our job to police guests." That staff member's silence cost Kira an 18-hour head start on the search that might have saved her life. Second, Torres del Paine's emergency response protocol had a gap. When a trail is closed, the park doesn't monitor it. No rangers patrol closed sections. No cameras. No checkpoints after the initial barrier. Kira walked past a single closure sign and a rope barrier at 6:15 a.m. After that, she was invisible to the park system. Nobody knew she was on the trail until her hostel reported her missing 2 days later. 2 days. Third, Kira's phone was recovered with 147 photos from her hike. The timestamps tell a story the search team couldn't. She was alive and moving at 2:30 p.m., 7 hours after entering the trail. The last photo was taken at 2:47 p.m. from the exposed section of the French Valley Ridge. The wind readings from the nearest weather station at that exact time showed gusts of 40 kilometers per hour. Manageable. Uncomfortable, but not lethal. 15 minutes later, at 3:02 p.m., the station recorded a gust of 118 kilometers per hour. The jump was almost instantaneous. From windy to catastrophic in 15 minutes, Kira took her last photo in manageable wind. She was likely swept off the ridge in wind 3 times stronger, less than 20 minutes later. She didn't ignore a storm. She was caught by one that arrived without warning. This is the complete story of Kira Johansson's disappearance. Every decision, every failure, every person who could have changed the outcome and didn't. By the end, you won't see this as a simple cautionary tale about an arrogant blogger. You'll see it as a systems failure, human, institutional, and meteorological, that killed a woman who was difficult to like but didn't deserve to die alone on a ridge in Patagonia. And the question that will stay with you isn't, why did Kira ignore the warning? It's this. If the hostel had called the park, if the park had patrolled the closed trail, if the forecast had been accurate, would Kira Johansson still be alive? The answer, according to the Chilean investigation, is almost certainly yes. She would be alive, she would still be posting, she would still be annoying, and Mateo Silva would still be a park ranger instead of a man who quit the job he loved because he couldn't stop dreaming about the woman who screamed at him and then walked into the wind. To understand how all of this fell apart, you need to know who Kira Johansson really was. Not the character the internet created. The actual person. Because the woman who stood at that closure barrier and shouted at a stranger was carrying more than a backpack. She was carrying 3 years of pressure, a failing business, and a secret she hadn't told anyone. Not her followers, not her family, not the 340,000 people who thought they knew her. That secret is where the real story begins. Chapter 2. The woman behind the username Kira Johansson was born in Malmö, Sweden, on March 14, 1991. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her father, Eric, was a maritime engineer. Her mother, Annika, taught elementary school. They were solidly middle class, comfortable, unremarkable in the way that Scandinavian families often are, stable, quiet, functional. Kira was none of those things. By the time she was 16, she'd been suspended from school twice. Not for violence or drugs. For leaving. She walked out of classes that bored her. She skipped exams she considered pointless. Her school counselor wrote in a report that Kira demonstrates exceptional intelligence undermined by an inability to accept authority she considers illegitimate. That sentence could have been written about the woman who screamed at Mateo Silva 12 years later. The pattern was always there. She graduated with mediocre grades and no plan. Her older brother Lars was an engineer like their father. Her sister Freya was studying medicine in Stockholm. Kira enrolled in a communications program at Lund University, lasted 1 semester, and dropped out. At 19, she bought a one-way ticket to Thailand. That trip was supposed to last 3 weeks. It lasted 7 months. She worked in hostels. She taught English. She learned to scuba dive. She started taking photographs. Good ones. Not influencer-style selfies with sunset backgrounds. Actual photography. Composition. Light. Texture. She had an eye for landscapes that her later followers rarely appreciated because they were too busy looking at her face. When she came home, she was different. Quieter in some ways. more certain in others. She told her mother she wasn't going back to university. Annika cried. Eric said nothing, which Kira later described as worse. Her brother Lars told her she was wasting her potential. Kira responded with a sentence her family would remember for years. Your version of potential isn't mine. She left Sweden again in 2012, this time for good. Over the next 7 years, Kira Johansson would visit 67 countries. She hiked in Nepal, Peru, New Zealand, Norway, Scotland, Morocco, Tanzania, and Patagonia. She completed the Annapurna circuit. She trekked to Everest Base Camp. She walked the Tour du Mont Blanc solo. She crossed the Sahara with a Berber guide. She summited Kilimanjaro on her 25th birthday. By any objective measure, Kira was an experienced, capable outdoors woman. Not elite, not a mountaineer, but far more competent than the internet gave her credit for after her disappearance. She understood weather. She understood risk. She carried proper gear. She registered her routes. She had taken wilderness first aid courses in 3 countries. This matters, because the narrative that emerged after her death, reckless influencer, ignores warning, pays the price, erased everything she actually was. It replaced a complex, skilled, difficult woman with a cartoon villain. And that cartoon villain was easier to dismiss, easier to blame, easier to forget. But Kira's story wasn't just about hiking, it was about money. She started her blog, Kira Walks, in 2014. At first, it was a personal journal. Beautiful photographs. Long, thoughtful essays about solitude, landscape, and the psychology of solo travel. She wrote about fear, about loneliness, about the specific kind of freedom that comes from carrying everything you need on your back. The writing was good, really good. A literary agent in London contacted her in 2015 about a potential book deal. Kira was thrilled. She spent 4 months writing a proposal. The agent passed. Beautiful writing, the rejection email said, but the market wants personality-driven content, not essays. Can you pivot to something more personal, more brand-friendly? Kira pivoted. By 2016, Kira Walks had become an Instagram-first operation. The thoughtful essays shrank. The selfies multiplied. She learned the algorithm. She studied what performed. Sunset photos with her silhouette. Inspirational captions about freedom and courage. Hashtags she privately found embarrassing. She told her friend Maja Lindgren in a WhatsApp message from 2017, I feel like I'm performing a version of myself that doesn't exist. But it pays, so... And it did pay. By 2018, Kira had 280,000 followers. She had sponsorship deals with 3 outdoor brands. She was earning roughly €4,000 a month, enough to travel full-time, not enough to save. She was, by social media standards, successful. By her own standards, she was trapped. Here's the secret she hadn't told anyone. Not her followers, not her family, not even Maja. By September 2019, 2 months before she disappeared, Kira was broke. Not struggling. Broke. Her sponsorship deals had dried up one by one. The outdoor brands that paid her in 2018 had shifted their budgets to YouTube creators and TikTok influencers. Instagram engagement was declining across the platform. Kira's follower count had plateaued at 340,000. Her posts were reaching fewer people. Her income had dropped from €4,000 a month to €900. She owed €6, 200 on a credit card. She had €1, 100 in her bank account. Her flight to Patagonia, the trip that would end her life, was booked on the last of her sponsorship credit. A Chilean outdoor clothing company had offered her a free jacket and €500 for 3 Instagram posts from Torres del Paine. That €500 was her food budget for the entire trip. Kira needed content. Not just any content. Viral content. The kind that reignites an algorithm, attracts new sponsors, proves you're still relevant. She needed something that would make people stop scrolling and pay attention. Think about that for a moment. When Kira stood at that closure barrier and argued with Matteo Silva, she wasn't just an arrogant tourist. She was a woman watching her career die in real time. The W Trek was supposed to be her redemption content. 4 days of stunning Patagonian landscapes. The kind of material that built her following in the first place. And now a park ranger was telling her she couldn't access the most photogenic section of the trail because of a storm that wasn't even there yet. Does that excuse what she did? No. She was cruel. She was public. She was wrong. But understanding why she reacted so explosively matters. Because the internet saw a woman having a tantrum. What they didn't see was a woman having a breakdown. 3 years of performing a fake version of herself. Declining income. Growing debt. A career that existed only as long as the algorithm permitted. And now, the one piece of content that might save her, blocked by a rope and a ranger. Her friend Maja received a voice message from Kira the night before the confrontation. November 16, 2019. 11:47 p.m. Chilean time. Kira's voice was tired. Shaky. She said, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm so tired of pretending everything is an adventure when I'm just scared and broke and alone. If this trip doesn't work, I think I'm done. I'll go home. Get a real job. Admit that everyone was right about me." Maja didn't hear the message until November 17th, Malmo time. By then, the confrontation had already happened. The viral video was already spreading. And Kira was already packing her bag for the hike that would kill her. But Kira wasn't the only person in this story carrying invisible weight. The ranger she humiliated, Mateo Silva, had his own burdens, his own pressures, his own reasons for being at that closure barrier on November 17, 2019. And understanding who Mateo was changes the story in ways the internet never considered. Because Mateo didn't just warn Kira, he begged her. And the reason he begged, the real reason, the one he didn't tell investigators until months later, had nothing to do with park protocol. It had to do with a body he'd found on that same ridge 3 years earlier, a body that haunted him every time the wind picked up, a body that made him close trails earlier than any other ranger, a body that made him desperate to stop Kira from doing exactly what she did. He couldn't save her, but to understand why that failure destroyed him, you need to know what happened at that closure barrier. Not the 47-second clip. The full confrontation. Every word. Every pause. Every moment the internet didn't see. If you're getting something from this story, if you want to understand what really happened and why it matters, subscribe to this channel. We go deeper than anyone else on stories like these. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because the confrontation between Kira and Mateo wasn't what you think it was. Chapter 3. The Ranger, the Warning, the Humiliation. Mateo Silva was 34 years old. He'd been a park ranger at Torres del Paine for 9 years. He grew up in Puerto Natales, the small city that serves as the gateway to the park. His father was a fisherman. His mother worked at a hotel that catered to tourists. Mateo grew up watching foreigners arrive with expensive gear and confident smiles, then returned from the park sunburned, exhausted, and humbled. He loved that. He loved the mountain's ability to strip people of their pretensions. He became a ranger because he loved the land. That's not a cliché in his case, it's documented. His application essay, written in 2010, said, "I want to protect this place from the people who think it belongs to them. It belongs to itself." In 9 years, Mateo had performed or assisted in 23 rescues. He'd carried a German hiker with a broken femur for 6 kilometers on his back. He'd talked a Japanese tourist through a panic attack on the exposed section of the French Valley, the same section where Kira would later disappear. He'd found 2 bodies in those 9 years. The first was a British climber who fell from the base of the towers in 2014. An accident. Sad, but clean. The second was different. In March 2016, Mateo found the body of a 22-year-old Argentine woman named Lucia Vega. She was a university student from Buenos Aires. She'd hiked the W Trek alone during an unexpected wind event. She was found on the French Valley Ridge. The coroner determined she'd been swept off her feet by a gust and struck her head on a rock formation. She died from a combination of blunt force trauma and hypothermia. She'd been alive for an estimated 3 hours after the initial fall, alive and unable to move, in wind that was stripping heat from her body faster than her metabolism could replace it. Mateo was the one who found her. He described it to a colleague as, quote, "the worst thing," I've ever seen." Lucia's face was frozen in an expression he couldn't describe. Her fingers were bloody from trying to crawl. She'd moved approximately 4 meters from where she fell. 4 meters in 3 hours. The wind wouldn't let her go farther. After Lucia's death, Mateo became the most cautious ranger in the park. His colleagues noticed. Some respected it. Others found it excessive. He closed trails earlier than protocol required. He argued with his supervisors about extending closure buffers from 12 hours to 24 hours before predicted wind events. He won that argument. The 24-hour precautionary closure that Kira would later rage against. That was Mateo's policy. He fought for it because of Lucia Vega. Because 3 hours of dying alone on a ridge in the wind was something he never wanted to find again. This is critical context that nobody who watched the viral video had. Kira didn't know about Lucia. She didn't know that the man she was screaming at had nightmares about a dead woman on the exact trail she wanted to hike. She didn't know that his overcautious closure policy existed because someone had already died in exactly the way Kira would die. She saw a bureaucrat. He saw Lucia Vega standing in front of him, about to walk into the wind. November 17, 2019, 7:42 a.m. The closure barrier at the French Valley trailhead. The weather that morning was clear. Cool. Wind at the trailhead was 15 kilometers per hour. Comfortable. The sky was blue. The Torres, the iconic granite towers, were fully visible. Perfect conditions. The kind of morning that makes hikers furious when they see a trail closed sign. Mateo was stationed at the barrier. Standard duty. He'd closed this section the previous evening based on a forecast from the Chilean Meteorological Directorate. The forecast predicted sustained winds of 80 to 100 kilometers per hour on exposed ridgelines beginning the following day, November 18th, in the afternoon. The 24-hour precautionary buffer meant the trail closed on the morning of the 17th. Between 7:42 a.m. and 9:15 a.m., Mateo turned away 11 hikers. Most were disappointed but compliant. 2 argued briefly. One French couple asked detailed questions about the forecast, thanked him, and left. A Chilean family with teenagers shrugged and redirected to the Gray Glacier Trail instead. Kira arrived at 9:22 a.m. She was alone. She carried a 45-liter pack. She wore a red hard-shell jacket, the one provided by her sponsor. She had trekking poles. She looked, to Mateo, like someone who knew what she was doing. Their initial conversation was calm. This is confirmed by a hiker named Thomas Brandt, a 41-year-old German dentist who was standing nearby, checking his phone. Thomas later provided a written statement to investigators. He described the first 2 minutes of the interaction as normal, professional. Kira asked why the trail was closed. Mateo explained the forecast. Kira asked when the storm was expected. Mateo said tomorrow afternoon, maybe evening. Kira asked if the trail was dangerous right now, at this moment. Mateo said no, but the closure was precautionary. Kira asked if she could hike in and return before the storm. Mateo said he couldn't authorize that. Policy was policy. This is where it turned. Kira's voice changed. Thomas Brandt noticed it. He described it as like a switch flipped. She went from asking questions to making accusations. She said Mateo was power tripping. She said the closure was insane, given the current conditions. She said she'd hiked in worse weather in Norway, Nepal, and Scotland. She said she'd completed treks more dangerous than this one. Before you were old enough to have this job. Mateo stayed calm. Witnesses confirmed this. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue back. He repeated the policy. He said, "I understand your frustration. The trail will reopen when conditions are confirmed safe. I can't make exceptions." And then Kira pulled out her phone. She started recording. She announced to her followers that she was being blocked from hiking by a park ranger who's never been above 1,000 meters. She called Mateo a bureaucrat playing God with people's vacations. She mocked his English. She mocked his uniform. She asked, on camera, "Is this what Chilean conservation looks like? One guy with a rope deciding who gets to see nature." The video lasted 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Kira posted an edited 47-second version to Instagram at 9:41 a.m. Within 2 hours, it had 50,000 views. By evening, it had passed 2 million. By the time Kira was reported missing, 11 million people had watched her scream at a man who was trying to save her life. But here's what wasn't in the video. What Thomas Brandt witnessed. what the camera didn't capture because Kira stopped recording. After the video ended, Mateo did something he'd never done before. He broke protocol. He told Kira about Lucia Vega. Not by name. He didn't share the name. But he told her about a young woman who died on that ridge 3 years ago, in wind conditions similar to what was forecast. He told her the woman had been experienced. He told her the woman had been alone. He told her the woman had survived the initial fall and died slowly. His voice cracked. Thomas Brandt noticed. Kira's reaction, according to Thomas, she paused. For about 5 seconds, she seemed to hear him. Then she said, and Thomas remembered this word for word, "That's tragic. But I'm not her." She turned and walked back toward the hostel. Mateo watched her go. He later told investigators he considered following her. He considered calling his supervisor to report a potential unauthorized entry. He didn't. He stayed at his post. He had a job to do. Other hikers were still approaching the barrier. That decision, to stay at the barrier instead of reporting Kira as a flight risk, would torment Mateo Silva for years. Because he knew. He could feel it. He told his girlfriend Camilla that evening, "That woman is going to do something stupid. I can see it in her eyes." But here's the thing about gut feelings. You can't close a trail based on someone's eyes. You can't file a report based on a tone of voice. You can't arrest someone for being angry at a park ranger. Mateo's instinct was right. His hands were tied by a system that only responds to actions, not intentions. And Kira's intentions were already set. Back at her hostel, the Refugio Los Cuernos. She ate dinner alone. She charged her phone. She reviewed her photos from the past 2 days. At 11:47 p.m., she sent the voice message to Maja, the one about being scared and broke and tired of pretending. At some point between midnight and 5 a.m., she made her decision. She would hike the French Valley. She would get the content she needed. She would be back before anyone noticed she was gone. The storm wasn't coming until tomorrow afternoon. She had a full day. She was wrong about the timing. But she didn't know that yet. Nobody did. What she also didn't know, what nobody outside the Chilean Meteorological Directorate knew, was that at 2 a.m. on November 18th, a low-pressure system off the Pacific coast had accelerated faster than any model predicted. The wind event forecast for the afternoon of the 18th was now expected to arrive by mid-morning. And mid-morning was generous. The first gusts would reach the French Valley ridgeline by early afternoon on the 17th. But that updated forecast wasn't issued until 6:30 a.m. on the 17th. And it wasn't received by Torres del Paine Park Administration until 7:15 a.m., and it wasn't forwarded to rangers in the field until 8:45 a.m. Mateo Silva received the update on his radio at 8:47 a.m. By then, he'd already been at the closure barrier for over an hour. By then, Kira had already been on the trail for nearly 3 hours. He didn't know she was out there. Nobody did. If you're following this story, and it's hitting different than what you expected, if you came here thinking this was about an arrogant influencer and now you're realizing it's about something much bigger, that means you understand what we're doing on this channel. We don't give you the headline version, we give you the truth. Subscribe if you want more of this. We've got stories coming that will change how you think about every outdoor disaster you've ever heard of. Now, back to November 17th. Because while Mateo was updating his closure signs with the accelerated forecast, Kira Johansson was already 2 hours into the hike that would erase her from the world. And the decisions she made in those first hours reveal something about her state of mind that nobody, not the investigators, not the media, not the internet, has ever fully examined. Chapter 4. Into the closed trail. Kira left the Refugio Los Cuernos at approximately 5:50 a.m. on November 17, 2019. The sky was dark. The temperature was 4 degrees Celsius. Wind at ground level was negligible. She wore her red sponsor jacket, black hiking pants, a wool beanie, and lightweight gloves. She carried her 45-liter pack with a rain cover, trekking poles, and a headlamp. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. This is the first of Kira's failures. Not the biggest, but the first. She was an experienced hiker. She knew the protocol. Every solo hiker is supposed to register their planned route at the park office or their accommodation. Kira had done this on every previous trek: Nepal, Peru, New Zealand. She was diligent about it. She told her friend Maja in a 2018 blog post, Always tell someone where you're going. Always. It's the most basic rule of solo hiking. She broke her own rule. Why? The answer is obvious but worth stating. She didn't register because she didn't want to be stopped. If she told the hostel staff she was hiking the French Valley, they would have told her the trail was closed. They might have tried to prevent her. They might have called the park office. She needed to leave without anyone knowing. But someone did know. A hostel staff member named Diego Munoz, 23 years old, working the early morning shift. Diego was cleaning the common area at 5:45 a.m. when he saw Kira packing her bag. He watched her fill her water bottles. He watched her lace her boots. He watched her check her phone, slide it into the waterproof case, and zip it into her jacket pocket. Diego knew the French Valley was closed. Every staff member at the refugio knew. It was posted on a whiteboard in the dining area. It had been announced at dinner the previous evening. Diego said nothing. In his statement to investigators, Diego explained, "I assumed she was doing one of the shorter trails. The Mirador base Torres is open. Lots of people leave early for it. I didn't think it was my place to ask." That statement is technically plausible. But investigators noted something Diego didn't mention. The Mirador base Torres trailhead is in the opposite direction from the French Valley. Kira left the refugio heading west. The Mirador is east. Diego would have seen which direction she walked. He either didn't notice or didn't care. The hostel's owner, a woman named Sofia Reyes, was asleep at 5:50 a.m. She wouldn't learn about Kira's departure until November 19th, 2 days later, when she realized Kira's bed hadn't been slept in for 2 nights and her belongings were still in storage. 2 days. Kira was alone on a closed trail for 2 full days before anyone realized she was missing. This is the second system's failure. And it's the one that most likely killed her. Because if the hostel had reported Kira's early departure on the morning of the 17th, even without knowing her exact route, the park would have begun checking trails by midday. Rangers could have reached the French Valley exposure zone by 2 p.m. The catastrophic wind gust hit at approximately 3:02 p.m. That's a 1-hour window. Narrow, but possibly enough. Instead, the search didn't begin until November 19th at 10 a.m. By then, Kira had been exposed to 2 days of extreme weather. 2 days of cold. 2 days of wind. 2 days alone. If she survived the initial gust, and the position of her backpack suggests she might have, those 2 days were a death sentence. Not the wind. The delay. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to 5:50 a.m. Kira is walking west from the refugio. Alone. In the dark. The trail from Los Cuernos to the French Valley trailhead is approximately 7 kilometers. Well marked. Not technical. Kira would have covered it in about 2 hours at a moderate pace, arriving at the French Valley junction around 8 a.m. The closure barrier was at this junction. A rope stretched between 2 posts. A laminated sign in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Trail closed. Extreme wind warning. No entry. Mateo Silva would arrive to man this barrier at 7:30 a.m. But at 8 a.m., when Kira likely reached the junction, Mateo was already there. Wait, if Mateo was at the barrier at 8 a.m., and Kira arrived at the junction around the same time, how did she get past him? She didn't go through the main junction. That's what investigators determined from her phone's photo timestamps and GPS metadata. Kira bypassed the barrier entirely. She left the main trail approximately 500 meters before the junction and cut through a section of Lenga forest. This route is known to experienced hikers. It's not official, it's not marked, but it's been used for years by people who want to access the French Valley without passing through the checkpoint. Kira knew about this bypass. She had to. You don't find it by accident. She either read about it online, learned about it from another hiker, or scouted it the day before. Her preparation was deliberate. This wasn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of the moment. She planned it. She studied the route. She set her alarm. She packed her bag. She chose her exit from the hostel. She bypassed the closure barrier intentionally. This is important because it demolishes the last defense anyone could make for Kira's decision. She didn't stumble into a closed trail. She didn't misunderstand the closure. She didn't think the rope was left up by mistake. She actively, knowingly, deliberately circumvented a safety measure designed to keep her alive. Was she experienced enough to assess the risk herself? Arguably, yes. She'd hiked in high winds before. She'd completed exposed ridgeline treks in worse conditions. Her skill level wasn't the problem. Her information was. She was operating on yesterday's forecast. Mateo had the updated forecast by 8:47 a.m. Kira was already past the barrier. She had no way to receive the update. Her phone had no cell signal on the trail. The park had no way to reach her. She was hiking with outdated information, in a closed section, off the grid. Let me pause here and ask you something. Actually, let me ask it this way. If you're watching this right now, and you've ever hiked a trail, and you've ever thought, I know better than the sign, remember this moment. Remember that Kira was competent, that she was experienced, that she was rational, and that she was wrong. Because the gap between confidence and reality is exactly wide enough to kill you. Kira's phone photos tell us what happened next. Timestamp by timestamp. 8:34 a.m. Photo taken at the entrance to the French Valley. Blue sky. Light wind. The valley stretching out ahead. Beautiful. She would have felt vindicated. The weather was fine. The ranger was wrong. The closure was unnecessary. 9:17 a.m. Photo at the first river crossing. She's standing on rocks in midstream. Her shadow is visible. The light suggests partly cloudy skies. Still calm. 10:02 a.m. Photo of the hanging glacier from the valley floor. Wide shot. Compositionally perfect. This was content. This was what she came for. 10:44 a.m. Photo looking back down the valley. Clouds building to the west. Not threatening yet, but present. 11:31 a.m. Photo of the upper valley. The angle suggests she's gaining elevation. Moving toward the ridge section. The exposure zone. Wind at this point, based on weather station data, was approximately 25 kilometers per hour. Noticeable. Not dangerous. 12:15 p.m. Photo of a rock formation near the ridge line. The image is slightly blurred. Wind was increasing. The weather station showed 35 kilometers per hour sustained, gusts to 50, 1:08 p.m. Photo from the ridge itself. The Torres visible in the background. The image is sharp. She braced the camera against rock. Wind at the station. 45 kilometers per hour sustained, gusts to 65. This is where an experienced hiker turns around. 65 kilometers per hour gusts on an exposed ridge are dangerous. Kira knew this. She'd written about wind thresholds on her blog. In a 2017 post about hiking in Iceland, she wrote, "My personal limit for exposed ridgelines is 50 kilometers per hour gusts. Above that, I turn back." No photo is worth your life. She was above her own stated limit. She didn't turn back. Why? We don't know. We can speculate. The content pressure. The financial desperation. The sunk cost of the entire bypass. The belief that the storm was still hours away. The fact that conditions were deteriorating gradually, not suddenly, which makes it psychologically harder to identify the moment to retreat. There's no clear threshold. Just a slow slide from uncomfortable to dangerous to deadly. 1:47 p.m. Photo from the most exposed section of the ridge. Wider shot. The clouds are thick now. Visibility is dropping. Wind at the station, 55 kilometers per hour sustained, gusts to 75. 2:30 p.m. Photo of her feet on the trail. The image is tilted. She was bracing against wind. Weather station, 60 kilometers per hour sustained, gusts to 85. 2:47 p.m. The last photo. A landscape shot looking south across the valley. The framing is off. The horizon is crooked. The clouds are dark and low. This photo was taken with shaking hands and wind that was now dangerous by any definition. Weather station reading at 2:47 p.m. 65 kilometers per hour sustained, gusts to 95. At 3:02 p.m., the station recorded a gust of 118 kilometers per hour. 15 minutes. That's the gap between Kira's last photo and the wind that almost certainly killed her. She had no warning, no gradual increase she could track. The gust front arrived as a wall. The meteorological data shows wind speed tripling in under 10 minutes, from severe to catastrophic. From "this is bad" to "this is unsurvivable," faster than she could have retreated to shelter. Somewhere on that ridge, between 2:47 p.m. and 3:02 p.m., Kira Johansson was hit by wind powerful enough to throw a person off their feet. The ridge at that point drops 300 meters on the northern side. Vertical rock. No ledges, no handholds, nothing to stop a fall. Her backpack was found 40 meters below the ridge trail, wedged between rocks on a narrow shelf. The straps were unbuckled. The lid was open. Here is where the story fractures into two possibilities that investigators could never resolve. Possibility 1. Kira was blown off the ridge while wearing her pack. The pack snagged on the rocks during the fall. The impact or the wind pulled her free of the straps. She continued falling. Her body landed somewhere in the 300-meter drop zone below. In the boulder fields. In the crevices. In the places that never see sunlight. The places where the park has never recovered a body. Possibility 2. Kira survived the initial gust. She was blown down but caught herself on the shelf where the pack was found. She removed her pack deliberately. Maybe to reduce wind resistance. Maybe because it was caught and she couldn't move with it on. She tried to climb or crawl to safety. She failed, she fell from the shelf. Or she succumbed to hypothermia on the shelf and her body was later moved by subsequent wind events. The search team favored possibility 2. The unbuckled straps. The open lid. The deliberate placement. These suggest a person, not a ragdoll, a conscious decision, a human being trying to survive. Which means Kira may have been alive after the gust. Alive on that shelf. Injured, probably. Hypothermic, certainly. But alive. Aware. Knowing that nobody knew where she was. Knowing that nobody was coming. Knowing that the trail was closed and she had bypassed the barrier, and nobody at the hostel had seen her leave and her phone had no signal. She may have died the way Lucia Vega died 3 years earlier. Slowly. In the wind. Alone. Exactly the way Mateo Silva had tried to warn her about. If you've been watching this far, you understand that this isn't a simple story. And we're not done. The search for Kira, what happened when they finally realized she was missing, revealed failures that go far beyond one blogger's bad decision. Subscribe and stay with this. Because the next part of this story is about what happens when a system designed to protect people fails at every single level. Chapter 5. The Search That Started Too Late, November 19, 2019, 8:15 a.m. Sofia Reyes, owner of Refugio Los Cuernos, walked through the dormitory during her morning check. Bed 14, Kira's bed hadn't been slept in. Kira's storage bag was still in the luggage room. Her sleeping bag liner was still hanging on the drying rack. Her checkout date was November 18th. She was 1 day overdue. Sofia assumed Kira had moved to a different refugio without collecting her things. This happens. Hikers change plans. They leave gear behind. They forget. Sofia set Kira's belongings aside and noted the uncollected items in her logbook. She did not contact the park office. At 3:30 p.m. that same day, a French hiker named Cécile Moreau approached Sofia and asked if she'd seen the Swedish girl with the red jacket. Cécile had met Kira briefly on November 16th. They'd shared a meal. Cécile had moved ahead on the W-Trek circuit and was now returning. She expected Kira to be at Los Cuernos. She wasn't. Sofia checked her records. Kira hadn't checked in at any other refugio on the W-Trek circuit. The refugios share a radio network. Sofia radioed Refugio Frances, Refugio Grey, and Refugio Chileno. None had seen Kira since the 16th. At 4 p.m. on November 19th, approximately 46 hours after Kira's last photograph, Sofia Reyes finally contacted the Torres del Paine Park Administration office. 46 hours. Let that settle. A woman disappeared on a closed trail during a catastrophic wind event, and nobody noticed for 46 hours. Not the hostel, not the park, not her family, not her 340,000 followers. Nobody. Kira's last Instagram post, the viral video of Mateo, was still generating comments. People were still debating whether she was right or wrong to challenge the ranger. The irony is almost unbearable. Millions of people were watching Kira's face on their phones while her actual body was somewhere on a ridge in Patagonia, beyond all help. The park office received Sophia's report at 4:12 p.m. The duty officer, a man named Rodrigo Fuentes, asked standard questions. When was Kira last seen? What was she wearing? Did she have a planned route? Was she hiking alone? Sophia couldn't answer most of these questions. She didn't know when Kira left. She didn't know which trail Kira took. She knew Kira was alone. She knew about the red jacket. Rodrigo then asked a question that would later become central to the investigation. Did anyone at the refugio see her depart on the morning of the 17th? Sophia said she'd ask her staff. She radioed back 20 minutes later. Diego Munoz confirmed he'd seen Kira packing at 5:45 a.m. on the 17th. He saw her leave the refugio heading west. Toward the French Valley. Toward the closed trail. Rodrigo understood immediately. He contacted Mateo Silva. Mateo was off duty that day. He'd been rotated to the park's eastern sector. When he heard Kira's description, Swedish, late 20s, red jacket, solo, he went silent for 4 seconds on the radio. Then he said, "That's the woman from the video. She went to the French Valley. I'm sure of it." Mateo was right. But being right 46 hours too late is worse than being wrong. The search operation launched at 6 a.m. on November 20th, approximately 63 hours after Kira's last known photograph. The park deployed 6 rangers, 2 volunteer search teams from Puerto Natales, and a Chilean Air Force helicopter from Punta Arenas. The weather had cleared by the 20th. Wind speeds on the ridge had dropped to 20 to 30 kilometers per hour. Manageable. The helicopter conducted aerial sweeps of the French Valley, the ridge section, and the boulder fields below the northern face. At 11:40 a.m. on November 20th, a ground team led by Ranger Andres Herrera found Kira's backpack. The location was 40 meters below the ridgeline trail, on a narrow rock shelf approximately 2 meters wide. The shelf was covered in gravel and lichen. No blood visible. No fabric caught on rocks. No drag marks. The pack was upright, straps unbuckled, top lid open. Contents intact. Water bottle, full. Energy bars, 3, unopened. Rain pants, a down jacket. A first aid kit, unopened. Sunscreen. A headlamp with full battery, and her phone in its waterproof case. The phone battery was dead. Missing from the pack. Nothing obvious. Everything you'd expect a well-prepared hiker to carry was there. Kira had removed the pack while still having access to all her survival resources. She hadn't been stripped of gear by the wind, she'd taken it off. The search expanded below the shelf. The boulder field beneath the northern face stretches for approximately 800 meters of broken, car-sized rocks with deep gaps between them. Some of these gaps are 10 to 15 meters deep, narrow, dark, unreachable without specialized caving equipment. The ground teams searched the accessible portions of the boulder field for 3 days. The helicopter flew thermal imaging sweeps. Useless after this many hours, but protocol required it. Dogs were brought in on November 22nd. The dogs showed interest in 2 areas of the boulder field, but couldn't pinpoint a location. The gaps between the rocks were too deep. The wind had dispersed scent. On November 23, 2019, 6 days after Kira's last photograph, the active search was suspended. Kira Johansson was officially classified as missing, presumed dead. Her body has never been found. Now let me tell you about the phone. Because the phone is the most important piece of evidence in this case, and what it revealed divided everyone involved. The phone was sent to Santiago for forensic analysis. The battery was replaced. The data was extracted. Investigators found 147 photographs from November 17th, time-stamped and GPS tagged. They confirmed what we've already discussed: Kira's route, her timing, the deteriorating conditions. The last photo at 2:47 p.m. The location, the most exposed section of the French Valley Ridge. But they also found something else. 2 voice memos, recorded on the phone's native app, not sent to anyone, not uploaded anywhere, just saved locally. The first voice memo was recorded at 1:23 p.m. on November 17th. Duration, 47 seconds. In it, Kira is breathing hard. Wind is audible but not overwhelming. She says, "The wind is picking up, but I'm almost at the top. I can see the glacier. The light is insane. This is going to be the best content I've shot in months. I just need 20 more minutes up here, and then I'll head down. I'll be back at the refugio by dark. 20 more minutes. She was timing herself. She had a plan. Get the shots, get out. This wasn't reckless abandon, this was calculated risk. Bad calculation, but calculated. The second voice memo was recorded at 2:53 p.m. Duration, 12 seconds. The wind noise is extreme. Kira's voice is barely audible. Investigators enhance the audio. What she says is, I can't. I need to get down. I can't stand up. The wind. The recording cuts off. Not ends. Cuts off. Mid-sentence. As if the phone was dropped, or she stopped recording to use both hands. 2:53 p.m. 6 minutes after her last photo. 9 minutes before the 118 kilometers per hour gust recorded at the weather station. Here's what that timing means. At 2:53 p.m., Kira was already unable to stand. The wind was already too strong for her to walk. She was recording what might have been a goodbye or a distress note. And then, 9 minutes later, it got 3 times worse. She was already in crisis before the catastrophic gust. The gust didn't catch her by surprise while she was happily hiking. She was already pinned down, already terrified, already trying to survive. The gust just finished what the wind had started. Investigators shared the voice memos with Kira's family. Her mother, Annika, listened to both recordings once. She has never listened again. Kira's brother Lars has refused to hear them. Her sister Freya transcribed them and then deleted the audio files from her own phone. She told a Swedish journalist, I hear her voice every night anyway. I don't need the recording. The phone data also answered one question and raised another. It confirmed that Kira bypassed the closure barrier at approximately 6:15 a.m. based on GPS data showing her route deviating from the main trail 500 meters before the junction. She was on the closed section of the trail for approximately 9 hours before the catastrophic wind hit. The question it raised: there were no photos between 2:47 p.m. and the voice memo at 2:53 p.m., 6 minutes unaccounted for, but there was GPS data. And that data showed something strange. Between 2:47 and 2:53, Kira's position moved 40 meters, not along the trail, perpendicular to it, toward the northern edge of the ridge. She moved toward the drop. Was she blown? Was she crawling for shelter behind a rock formation near the edge? Was she disoriented? We don't know. The GPS accuracy at that point was plus or minus 10 meters, not precise enough to determine whether her movement was voluntary or involuntary. But the search team noted, the rock shelf where her backpack was found was directly below the point where her GPS signal showed that lateral movement, directly below. She went over the edge before the worst gust hit. Probably not a free fall. The shelf caught her or her pack, but she went over. This is why the search team believes Kira may have survived the initial fall. She wasn't hit by a 118 kilometers per hour gust and launched into the void. She was blown or moved to the edge in 65 to 95 kilometers per hour wind, went over onto the shelf, and was there when the 118 kilometers per hour gust arrived 9 minutes later. On the shelf, below the ridge, she might have been partially sheltered from the worst of the wind. She might have been alive for hours, maybe longer. The Chilean investigation would eventually conclude that the most probable cause of death was, hypothermia and exposure following a fall from the ridgeline trail, not the wind directly. The cold, the immobility, the injuries from the fall, the impossibility of self-rescue on a 2-meter shelf with a 250-meter drop below. She died slowly. Like Lucia Vega. Like the woman Mateo tried to warn her about. If this story is making you think about risk, about warnings, about what we ignore, that's what this channel is built for. We don't just tell you what happened. We make you understand why it happened. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because the investigation into Kira's disappearance uncovered failures that go beyond one woman, one ranger, and one storm. The system failed, and nobody wanted to admit it. Chapter 6. The Blame, the Cover-Up, the Truth. The Chilean investigation into Kira Johansson's disappearance was conducted by CONAF, the Corporación Nacional Forestal, the agency that manages Chile's national parks. The investigation began on November 25, 2019, and concluded on March 12, 2020. The final report was 74 pages. It named one primary cause and 3 contributing factors. Primary cause: unauthorized entry into a closed trail by the deceased. Contributing factor 1: unprecedented meteorological conditions exceeding forecast parameters. Contributing factor 2: insufficient monitoring of closed trail sections. Contributing factor 3: delayed notification of the missing person by accommodation staff. That's the official version. Clean. Bureaucratic. Blame distributed evenly enough to avoid anyone losing their job. Kira's fault for entering the trail. Nature's fault for being unpredictable. The system's fault, vaguely, for not monitoring better. Nobody fired. Nobody prosecuted. Nobody held individually accountable. Kira's family rejected the report. Her mother, Annika, hired a Swedish attorney named Bjorn Lindquist, who specialized in international wrongful death cases. Lindquist reviewed the CONAF report and identified what he called 3 deliberate omissions. Omission 1. The report did not mention Diego Muñoz by name. It referenced accommodation staff who observed the deceased departing. It did not note that Diego saw Kira heading west toward the closed trail and said nothing. It did not examine whether the hostel had a legal obligation to report suspicious early departures during trail closures. It treated Diego's silence as a passive event rather than an active failure. Omission 2. The report did not examine the communication delay between the Chilean Meteorological Directorate and the park administration. The updated forecast was issued at 6:30 a.m. The park received it at 7:15 a.m. Rangers in the field received it at 8:45 a.m. That's a 2-hour, 15-minute delay from forecast to field. The report noted the updated forecast's existence but did not investigate whether faster communication could have enabled a ranger to intercept Kira on the trail before conditions deteriorated. Omission 3. The report did not address the absence of physical barriers at the trail bypass route. The main trail junction had a rope barrier and a sign. The bypass through the Lenga forest had nothing. No barrier, no camera, no sensor, nothing. The report's recommendation of improved monitoring did not specify how, when, or at what cost. Lindquist filed a formal complaint with CONAF on behalf of the Johansson family in April 2020. He also filed a civil lawsuit against the Refugio operator, the company that owned and managed Refugio Los Cuernos, for negligent failure to report a guest's unauthorized departure. The Refugio's parent company, a Santiago-based hospitality group called Fantástico Sur, responded through their attorneys. Their defense was straightforward. Refugios are accommodation providers, not security services. Staff are not trained or authorized to restrict guests' movements. Diego Muñoz had no obligation to question Kira's plans or report her departure direction. Legally, this defense was strong. There was no Chilean law requiring hostel staff to monitor or report guest movements. The Refugio's contract with guests included a liability waiver for, quote, activities undertaken outside the Refugio's premises. Kira had signed this waiver upon check-in, but the lawsuit achieved something the CONAF report didn't. Through discovery, Lindquist obtained internal communications from Fantástico Sur that revealed a pattern. Between 2016 and 2019, staff at Fantástico Sur Refugios had observed guests departing toward closed trails on at least 14 documented occasions. Internal emails showed that staff were aware this was happening. One email from a regional manager, dated February 2018, stated, "Staff should not confront guests about their hiking plans. We are not the park police. If guests choose to ignore closures, that is their decision and their risk. Our liability ends at the Refugio door." That email was written 21 months before Kira Johansson disappeared. The company knew guests were hiking closed trails. They had a policy of deliberate non-intervention. They chose not to report, not because it was legal, because it was easier, because confronting guests about their plans might generate negative reviews, because calling the park office might create a paper trail that connected the Refugio to incidents on closed trails. The email became public when Lindquist submitted it as evidence. Chilean media picked it up. The headline in La Tercera one of Chile's largest newspapers, read, "Company policy. Don't ask, don't tell when tourists enter closed trails." The article was published on June 14, 2020. It was shared 42,000 times. Fantástico Sur issued a statement calling the email an isolated communication that did not reflect company policy. They announced a comprehensive review of staff training. They did not admit fault. They did not apologize. The lawsuit was settled out of court in September 2020. The terms are confidential. A non-disclosure agreement prevents the Johansson family from discussing the settlement amount or specific terms. Bjorn Lindquist would only say, "The family received an acknowledgement that the system failed. It does not bring Kira back." Now, the viral video. Because the video didn't just disappear when Kira did. It took on a second life. A darker one. Within hours of the news that Kira was missing, the internet's response split into two camps. Camp 1. Sympathy and concern. People who recognized that regardless of Kira's behavior, a woman was missing and probably dead. People who called for the search to be intensified. People who donated to a GoFundMe set up by Maja Lindgren to fund a private search team. Camp 2. Celebration. People who said Kira got what she deserved. People who posted the viral video with captions like "Karma is real." People who made memes. People who turned a woman's likely death into entertainment. One tweet, later deleted but screenshotted, read, "That ranger tried to save her life and she spat in his face." Nature finished the argument. It received 31,000 likes. Mateo Silva saw the tweets. He saw the memes. He saw strangers treating Kira's death as a punchline to validate his warning. And it broke him. In a 2020 interview with a Chilean outdoor magazine called Revista Outdoors, Mateo said, "People think I feel vindicated. I don't. I feel sick. I stood at that barrier and watched a woman walk toward her death. I told her what would happen. She didn't listen. And now people congratulate me? For what? For being right. I don't want to be right. I want her to be alive. I want to be wrong about everything." The interviewer asked if he blamed Kira. Mateo's response, "I blame all of us. I blame her for not listening. I blame myself for not doing more. I blame the hostel for not reporting her. I blame the park for not monitoring the bypass. I blame the internet for turning it into a joke. Everyone failed. Everyone." The interview was translated into English and posted on several hiking forums. The response was divided. Some praised Mateo's empathy. Others accused him of false modesty. A former colleague anonymously told the same magazine that Mateo had become obsessed with the Johansson case and that his work performance had deteriorated in the months after the disappearance. Mateo requested a transfer from field duties to administrative work in March 2020. The request was denied. The park was understaffed. In August 2020, Mateo resigned from CONAF. He'd served for 10 years. His girlfriend Camilla told a friend, who later spoke to a journalist, that Mateo had nightmares about both Lucia Vega and Kira Johansson, that he would wake up in the middle of the night and say, I told her about Lucia. She said she wasn't her. I'm not her." Kira's last words to Mateo, they became the words that tormented him. Now there's one more aspect of this story that the investigation touched on but the media largely ignored. The forecast failure. The Chilean Meteorological Directorate's forecast for November 17th, 18th, 2019 predicted the wind event arriving on the afternoon of the 18th. It arrived on the afternoon of the 17th, 18 hours early. The updated forecast was issued at 6:30 a.m. on the 17th, roughly 9 hours before the catastrophic gusts hit the ridge. That's a significant correction. And it was made too late to save anyone who was already on the trail. An independent meteorological review commissioned by the Johansson family's legal team examined the forecast failure. The review, conducted by Dr. Emilia Soto of the University of Chile's Department of Geophysics, found that the low-pressure system responsible for the wind event was detectable in satellite imagery as early as November 15th, 2 days before the disaster. The system was tracked, but its speed of approach was underestimated by the forecasting model. Dr. Soto's review concluded, the forecasting error was within acceptable parameters for the model used. The model's accuracy for wind events in the Torres del Paine region is approximately 78% for timing within a 12-hour window. The November 17th event fell within the 22% error margin. The model performed as expected. The expectation was insufficient. In simpler language, the forecast wasn't wrong because someone made a mistake. It was wrong because the tools weren't good enough. And nobody had invested in making them better. Dr. Soto recommended that CONAF invest in localized weather stations on high-risk ridgelines, rather than relying on valley floor stations several kilometers from exposure zones. She recommended real-time wind monitoring with automated alerts. She estimated the cost at approximately $180,000 US for the French Valley section alone. As of 2024, one additional weather station has been installed in the French Valley. It provides real-time data. The cost was $23,000. It covers one section of the ridge. The rest remains unmonitored. Progress, but not enough. If you've watched this far, genuinely, thank you. You're the reason we make these videos this thorough. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a comment telling us what you think the biggest failure was. Kira's decision, the hostel's silence, the park's monitoring gap, or the forecast. We read every comment. And we're building this channel for people who want the real story, not the headline. Now, the final chapter. What happened to everyone involved? What changed? What didn't? And the question that still has no answer. What really happened to Kira Johansen on that shelf? In those final hours, alone. Chapter 7. What the wind left behind. Kira Johansen's body has never been recovered. Not in 2019. Not in 2020. Not in any year since. The boulder field beneath the northern face of the French Valley Ridge has been searched 4 times. Each search covered more ground than the last. Each search found nothing. The Chilean search and rescue commander, Major Felipe Contreras, explained why, in a 2021 briefing. The boulder field contains an estimated 200,000 cubic meters of broken rock. The gaps between boulders range from 30 centimeters to 15 meters deep. Many are inaccessible without drilling or heavy machinery. A human body in that terrain is, effectively, permanently concealed. Kira is still there, somewhere in those rocks. In the dark. In the wind that never stops. Her mother Annika visited Torres del Paine in February 2020. She wanted to see the ridge. She wanted to stand where Kira stood. Park rangers guided her to the French Valley Trail, now reopened, and walked with her to the section of ridge where Kira's GPS signal last registered. Annika stood there for 11 minutes. She didn't speak, she didn't cry. She looked at the drop. She looked at the rocks below. And then she said, to nobody in particular, "It's beautiful. I understand why she wanted to be here." Ranger Andres Herrera, who had found Kira's backpack, was part of the escort team. He said later that Annika's composure was the most devastating thing he'd witnessed in his career. She didn't fall apart, he said. She just stood there and accepted it. Like she was meeting the place that took her daughter. I've carried injured hikers for hours and felt less exhausted than I did standing next to that woman. Annika returned to Sweden the following week. She has not been back to Chile. She keeps Kira's backpack in a closet in her apartment in Malmö. She told a Swedish documentary team in 2021, "I can't open it. I can't throw it away. It smells like her sunscreen. That's all I have left." Kira's father, Eric, has not spoken publicly about his daughter's disappearance. He declined all interview requests. Her brother Lars gave one statement to a Swedish newspaper in December 2019. "My sister was stubborn, brilliant, infuriating, and braver than anyone I know. She made a terrible decision. She paid for it with her life. Anyone who celebrates that is not worth my words." Her sister Freya became an advocate for solo hiking safety. She partnered with the Swedish Outdoor Association to develop guidelines for solo trekkers in remote areas. The guidelines, published in 2021, include a section on trail closures that reads, "A trail closure is not a suggestion. It is a boundary between calculated risk and unacceptable danger. The weather you see is not the weather that's coming. Trust the people whose job it is to know the difference." Freya told an interviewer she wrote that passage while thinking about Matteo Silva. She never contacted him. She said she wanted to but didn't know what she would say. "Thank you for trying. I'm sorry she didn't listen. Both feel inadequate. Both are true." Kira's friend Maja Lindgren shut down the GoFundMe after the active search ended. It had raised €14, 200, enough to fund a private search team that spent 3 days in the boulder field in January 2020. They found nothing. Maja returned the remaining funds to donors. She also archived Kira's blog, Kira Walks. The site still exists, frozen in time. The last post is from November 14, 2019, 3 days before Kira disappeared. It's a photo essay from the first 2 days of the W trek. The last line reads, "Patagonia is everything I hoped it would be. Tomorrow, the French Valley." Maja doesn't post about Kira on social media anymore. She told a podcaster in 2022, "I grieved publicly for a year. Then I realized I was performing grief the same way Kira performed adventure. I stopped. I grieve privately now. It's harder. It's more honest. The viral video is still online. It has been viewed over 14 million times across platforms. The comments are a museum of human judgment. Sympathy and cruelty in equal measure." Kira's Instagram account has not been updated since November 17, 2019. It has gained 80,000 followers since her disappearance. People follow dead accounts. The algorithm doesn't know the difference. Mateo Silva left Porto Natales in early 2021. He moved to Valdivia, a city in southern Chile, 500 kilometers from Torres del Paine. He works at a plant nursery. He grows native trees from seed. He doesn't hike anymore. He doesn't visit national parks. He told a friend, who shared this with a journalist, with Mateo's permission, that he lost the ability to see wilderness without seeing death. Mateo and Kira never had a conversation longer than 5 minutes. They met once, at a rope barrier, for 5 minutes that defined both of their lives. He tried to save her. She refused to be saved. And the system around them both, the hostel, the park, the forecast, the algorithm, the internet, failed so completely that even if one of them had acted differently, the outcome might have been the same. That's the part nobody wants to accept. Not the internet commenters. Not the investigation. Not even the family. The truth is, Kira could have listened to Mateo and still died. If she'd hiked the trail the next day, November 18th, when the storm was supposed to arrive, she would have been on the ridge when the wind came. The forecast was wrong in both directions. The storm came early and lasted longer than predicted. The trail wasn't safe on the 18th either. The closure should have been extended. It wasn't, because the updated forecast didn't arrive until after Mateo's shift ended. The system was broken at every level. Kira walked through the cracks, and the cracks were wide enough to swallow her whole. Diego Munoz, the hostel staff member who watched Kira leave, still works in the tourism industry. He transferred to a different refugio in 2020. He has never spoken publicly about Kira. In his investigator statement, his final line was, "I think about her every morning at 5:45. Sofia Reyes sold her share of Refugio Los Cuernos in 2021. She cited, quote, personal reasons. Staff who worked under her said she became anxious about guest safety to the point of dysfunction, checking beds multiple times per night, calling the park office if anyone checked out before 7 a.m. She couldn't sleep when the wind blew. The sound reminded her. Fantástico Sur, the Refugio's parent company, implemented new protocols in 2020 after the settlement. Staff are now required to log all guest departures before 6 a.m. and report any guest heading toward closed trail sections. The protocol exists on paper. Whether it's followed consistently is a matter of debate. A 2022 audit by CONAF found partial compliance at 3 of 5 Fantástico Sur refugios. Partial compliance. Bureaucratic language for, sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Torres del Paine National Park made 3 changes after Kira's disappearance. First, the single weather station in the French Valley was supplemented by a ridge-level station providing real-time wind data. This station has issued 23 automated wind alerts since installation. On 6 occasions, these alerts triggered emergency trail closures that were not in the original forecast. 6 times when the system worked because of Kira. Second, the trail bypass through the Lenga forest was blocked with a physical barrier, a metal gate with a combination lock. Rangers change the code weekly. The gate has been bypassed twice since installation, both times by hikers who climbed over it. One was fined. One was never identified. Third, CONAF implemented a policy requiring refugios to report any guest who is 12 hours overdue on a registered hiking plan. This policy only works if guests register. Registration is recommended but not mandatory. The gap remains. 3 changes. All incremental. All insufficient. All better than nothing. Since Kira Johansson's disappearance, 2 other hikers have died in Torres del Paine from wind-related incidents. One in 2021. One in 2023. Both were on open trails. Both were caught by gusts that exceeded forecasts. Neither bypassed a closure. They did everything right. The wind killed them anyway. The mountain doesn't distinguish between the reckless and the careful. It treats them exactly the same. Kira's case became a reference point in debates about social media and outdoor safety. Academic papers cite her. Safety organizations reference her. Her story is taught in wilderness guide training programs in Chile, Argentina, and New Zealand. She became an example. A cautionary tale. A bullet point in a PowerPoint presentation about risk management. She would have hated that. Kira, who spent her whole life resisting other people's categories, who walked out of classes that bored her, who left Sweden because her family's version of success wasn't hers, who built a career on the idea that freedom meant answering to no one, who, in the end, answered to the wind. Here's what stays with me about this story. Not the viral video, not the investigation, not the systemic failures. What stays with me is the second voice memo. I can't. I need to get down. I can't stand up. The wind. 12 seconds. Cut off mid-sentence. The last known words of Kira Johansson. She wasn't performing. She wasn't creating content. She wasn't playing a character for 340,000 followers. She was a human being. Alone. Terrified. Recording her own voice. Because there was nobody to hear it. No algorithm. No audience. No brand deal. Just wind and rock. And a woman who realized, too late, that the ranger was right. We don't know her last thought. We don't know if she died quickly or slowly. We don't know if she was conscious at the end. We don't know if she regretted the video, the bypass, the hike, or her entire life. We know nothing about her final hours except that she spent them alone, in a place she chose to be, having made a decision she couldn't undo. And that's the cruelest part of Kira Johansson's story. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't incompetent. She wasn't the cartoon villain the internet created. She was experienced, capable, and desperate. She made a calculated decision based on incomplete information. She was wrong, and the consequences were absolute. Mateo Silva told her the truth. She said, "I'm not her." She meant she wasn't Lucia Vega. She meant she was different, better prepared, more experienced, smarter. She was all of those things. And she died the same way. The mountain doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your experience. It doesn't care about your followers. It doesn't read your blog. It doesn't watch your videos. It has one rule, and the rule isn't fair, and the rule isn't flexible, and the rule doesn't negotiate. Respect it or disappear. Kira Johansson disappeared on November 17, 2019. She was 28 years old. She had 340,000 followers. She had a mother who smells her sunscreen. She had a ranger who dreams about her. She had a voice memo that ends mid-sentence. She had a backpack placed deliberately on a shelf, straps unbuckled, lid open, as if she'd be right back. She's still out there, somewhere in the rocks, in the wind. If this story stayed with you, if it changed how you think about risk, about warnings, about the gap between confidence and reality, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who hikes alone, someone who thinks trail closures are suggestions, someone who trusts their experience more than the mountain. They need to hear this. Not to scare them, to save them. We go deep on stories like these because the surface version is never the real one. The headline said, "Blogger Humiliated Ranger Vanished on Trail." The truth is, a broken system, a broken forecast, a broken woman, and a man who tried to hold the line and couldn't. Drop a comment. Tell us what you think really killed Kira. Was it her decision? The hostile silence? The forecast failure? The park's blind spots? Or was it something bigger? The pressure to perform, to create, to prove that freedom, means never listening to anyone. We read every comment. We respond to the ones that challenge us. This community is why we do this. Next week, a story from the Andes that makes this one look simple. 8 climbers. 1 guide. A decision made at 6,000 meters that split the group in half. 4 survived. 4 didn't. And the guide? He's still climbing. Still guiding. Still defending the choice that killed his clients. Subscribe. Hit the bell, we'll see you there. Kira's backpack is still in her mother's closet. The sunscreen still smells the same. The wind on the French Valley Ridge still blows. And somewhere in those rocks, Kira Johansson is still waiting to be found. She won't be, but the truth about what happened to her. Every decision, every failure, every person who could have changed the outcome. That doesn't have to stay buried. Now you know. All of it. Every word. What you do with it is up to you.